The following video series will provide many perspectives through the personal narratives of elders and recognized knowledge holders. These videos will also explore how the dispossession of land from Indigenous peoples took place throughout what is now called Canada. This project is intended for educational use only. In our words. As Indigenous peoples, our ways of knowing are strongly connected to our history, land, animals, and the sky. It is through our history that we will be guided into the future. Our words and our land are the truth.
So Chief Pontiac was not having the Royal Proclamation. He was not having the Treaty of Niagara. He felt that it was important to keep Indigenous lands away from the British. He felt that they were crooked and that they were going to try to steal all of the land. And so it was years after when he actually gave his pipe to Sir William Johnson and said, "I'll fight you no more." But clearly told him, that he knew that what he was up to and he didn't like it, but that he would honor peace if that's what it was. They actually say that the British themselves hired this other tribe to kill him. And so they got rid of Pontiac because he was the rebellion. He was the threat. And God forbid if he was ever to get a second wind. To think that everybody was conglomerated in this big happy family is not the truth. They were still fighting. There's actually still battles that took place along the North Shore after the Treaty of Niagara.
You see this progression of degradation, I guess you will call it, in the relationship. The first survey occurs at Kingston in 1783. The gunshot. There's not even any proof that it was executed by the chiefs. So then if you start to look at that partnership or that relationship from 1764, nothing really happens along the North Shore of Lake Ontario until after the Revolution. There isn't really no treaty relationship. It was just a matter of opening up the land to resettle the Loyalists.
Chief Shingwak was an Ojibwe man who was born south of Lake Superior, and he was raised by his mother. And he quickly became a very spiritual person and was noted for his strong medicinal abilities, but also his warrior ways. And so they say the Americans started to cross onto the North Shore of Lake Huron and Lake Superior, and they started to take resources. And of course, we don't view those things as resources. That's our land. There's a lot of spirits in that. So of course, Shingwak quickly went to defend, their indigenous territories from the Americans. And in July of 1812, Chief Shingwak took 800 warriors to St. Joseph Island. There was a fort there. He gathered up a handful of British, like not even 50 of them, and zoomed across to Fort Mackinac and took over the fort, the American fort. And actually this started the War of 1812. The Ojibwe people were fighting in the War of 1812 to protect their own autonomy. They weren't fighting to protect the British land, because at that time there simply wasn't any. Those were still Indigenous lands. And Chief Shingwak said, "We are going to war to protect our independent Ojibwe homelands." And so he gathered warriors from all over the place. Same with Tecumseh. And they fought, fighting for their own lands. Of course, the British fought the French to claim title. While this was going on, this new entity called America was formed, And they're trying to define their territory, so of course the British had to fight them. And once they did, of course they claimed what we now know as Canada as Crown land. So during this whole treaty process, the populations of Indigenous people were very, very low. You had influenza, you had outbreaks of smallpox, and also they say that half of the population around the Great Lakes were diminished during the War of 1812.
The borderlands were sealed after the War of 1812. That sort of severs the Great Western Confederacy, you know, our people and those tribes on the other side of the American border. You have now the British realize that the border is vulnerable. The border has been breached 4 times by the Americans. Shadow Gay, Chrysler's Farm, York, and Detroit. And so the British now need to secure land in from the old treaties. Whoever could build the first mills, they were those guys were the ones that became the real important people in the growing communities. So then the ecology starts to change. You start to flood the streams and the rivers, and that's going to change the ecology. Colonial drainage laws come down in 1835. So farmers now have the authority or the ability now to drain the land. There's the union that occurs in 1841, and the province of Canada is created out of that.
The British had everything mapped out. They had all of the copper and the nickel and the white pine. They had all of the gold, all mapped out. And so once the land was secured as Crown land from the Americans and it eliminated any threat from the Americans, then they went into full-on resource extraction. That was the whole plan from the beginning.
And then the Bagot Commission occurs, and that now takes on the Indian problem. Out of the Bagot Commission comes this idea of the industrial school. And so it's a predecessor of the residential school. T.G. Anderson, the Superintendent General of Indian Affairs, he comes to the communities and he says to the people, we would like the smaller reserve communities to move to those communities, participate in this industrial school. And so the chiefs agreed that we will provide 1/4 of our annuity money to help support the schools. And they buy into this scheme because they believe that education will help our people survive. Why did they do that? Because our people are still de facto self-governing. It's pre-Confederation, right? Our people control their treaty money, they control their membership, and they control their land and resources. What's left of it?